Good afternoon, everyone, and how are you? It's so good to see you back again. It's Friday afternoon. If you can hear me, may I request that you please type yes in the chat box so I know we're good. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, so grade 6, 7, and 8. Now, I had a question before I started, and that was, I've posted this in the chat box already in case you've missed some of our earlier webinars. Those recorded links have already been shared in the chat box. Of course, you will get a mail in subsequently tomorrow that will also give you those links. Now, just to catch you up with what we've been doing, in case you've missed some of the earlier webinars, this is what we did in our very first webinar on the 5th of February, wherein we spoke about these talking points, and there we covered grades initial to 3. So as you can see, the structure has by and large laid out in front of you. And then, of course, in the subsequent week, which was last week, we looked at grades 4, 5, and again, we followed this kind of a structure. Excuse me, except that over here, instead of talking about communication skills, I spoke a little bit about 21st century skills. Now, I understand that a lot of you are coming back in for this very same webinar each time. So I have a thought, and that is, this is in today's webinar. This is what I would like to do. But what I thought of doing is starting directly with grades 6, 7, and 8, and actually allow for you or to actually ask me to demonstrate something just for clarification. So if you prefer me to do that, then I would start with grades 6, 7, and 8 and come back to talking about the examinations and so on a little later, if time permits. But for the earlier parts, that's communication skills and 21st century skills, I request you to please look at the earlier recordings. Of course, if there's time, I'd be happy to go into that as well. The syllabus score I am going to touch on very briefly, and then go straight into the grades. So is that okay with you? If you can just type yes in the box, so I know that we can get into the meat of the matter per se, which is to talk about all the various grades. Okay, so I think that seems by and large agreeable to most. Okay, so on that note, let's just start. Quick heads up. This is the syllabus that I'm referring to. Grade 6, 7, and 8, interestingly, teachers, has the online version as well in a variant form. So I've tried to include that as well in the notes as we go forward. My colleagues Anthony and Soumyan are joined in today to kind of help with any questions. But my one request is, if it's something got to do with operations, then you can please put that into the chat box. If it's specific questions got to do with Q&A with regard to the subject, then please put it in the Q&A box so that I can have a look at it at the end and cover all your questions. My one request is, I know a lot of questions will keep coming up, but if I've answered a question, then please just delete it out of the box inadvertently while talking, so that it's a little easier that way. So this is the syllabus I'm referring to, the 2020 syllabus. There is the digital version as well, which you can download. Now, this is the part that I would normally talk to you about, decoding the core of the syllabus. And in every syllabus of Trinity, the first few pages are, in my opinion, perhaps sacrosanct, for the simple reason that they talk to you about the relevance of the skills and the assessment. And when I talk about relevance, I'm talking about real, everyday usage relevance, levels for an age guidance, the various attainment bands, the recognition that these assessments enjoy, suggested qualification times to help prepare you as a teacher, how much time to put in with a student, and also how much of background learning students must also have in order to prepare for an assessment. And then, of course, we look at the various levels and qualifications that may happen along the way. And of course, I think on page 5 is perhaps the single most important part, which talks about the skills. That's very specifically the syllabus touches on, which our young learners today need in their academic or professional life. So those are pages that I think are very, very important. I just want to stress once again, this is what those skills look like. The 21st century skills covered in the communication skills syllabus. So if you pick up, for instance, another subject syllabus, an acting syllabus, you will find the skill and the meaning there, but you will find how the exam supports this, the relevance of that changes per the syllabus. So again, it's an interesting read when you move from one syllabus to another. Which brings me to, let's talk straight about examinations. And we're going to look today at the grades with a little more minute detail, looking at some of the feedback that you'll shared after the last webinar. You'll had asked that we kind of look perhaps maybe at examples. So I would like to be able to do that for you today with all the tasks and all the grades going forward. So here, very quickly, what does the support framework look like when you're preparing for an exam? So firstly, it touches upon the foundational skills, which I will show you in the next slide. It tells you very clearly what the learning outcomes should be, which is what a real syllabus would do. It also tells you about the assessment criteria and the attainment descriptors, which in the case of communication skills varies from grade to grade. So let me repeat that carefully. The assessment criteria and the attainment descriptors vary from grade to grade. And of course, on page 8, we will talk about the foundational skills of the syllabus, and the learning outcomes are also grouped either for a grade individually or for a couple of grades. Now, that brings us straight today to the exam tasks. And normally at this time, we are somewhere closer to the half-past mark. But today we seem to have gained a few minutes by reordering what we are doing. So I want to preface all of this by saying communication skills is one of the most enjoyed skills, one of the skills that can make or break possibly everything in life, certainly in work and very definitely in the home. But to develop these kind of skills, there are two components to it. And I'd like to share this particular image with you of an anthropologist, a gentleman by the name of Edward T. Hall. This particular rendition on the left-hand side that you see is known as the Iceberg of Culture. And what Edward Hall talks about is a very, he gives us an analogy to say that when it comes to culture, we are like an iceberg. On one hand, what you see on the tip of the surface, all right, is just a very finite, definite set of things that are at the polished end of it all. But in order to achieve that particular level, there is a whole lot that's happening below the surface that actually serves as a foundation. Now, if you move from the left to the right, and by the way, you're all very welcome to take screenshots for further thinking. But if you move to the picture on the right-hand side, you will see things like knowledge and skills is something that we see in the outwardly surface. But what is it that actually helps create that final manifestation? So things like motives is the underlying layer, traits, image, or self-image in particular, roles, responsibilities. And I'm going to be talking about this in a second from now again. But I just wanted to tell you, teachers, that when you start to approach these grades of 6, 7, and 8, it's not just the communication skill as in how we would typically assess body language and speech and the ability to engage with the audience and so on, but it is on what premise is communication built on. And which is why in an earlier webinar, I added one more set of skills that I feel is very, very important, which is intrapersonal communication. That is that little discussion that we have between ourselves and within ourselves. Now, I will come back to this point, but I wanted to preface grade 6, 7, and 8 to say that as teachers, we need to work on building the foundations, at these ages. You can do it from the very early ages as well, but in a far more simplified way. But here in particular, almost every task is going to ensure that the foundation is strong. So what does grade 6, 7, and 8 look like? Believe it or not, these are the learning outcomes. And it might seem like very little, okay, except that what you see generally in black applies to grades 6, 7, and 8. And what you see in blue are incremental additions to grades 7 and 8. Okay, so these are the learning outcomes that we're going to be looking at, and in specific detail, the tasks associated with something like that. Okay, now this of course is always a slide that I like to share with everybody, just so that you have an understanding that when you appear for an assessment, how is it that someone gets a distinction, and why do they get a merit, and what is the difference between them? So I've taken the example of a grade 6 exam, and right on the top, I've put for you the 3 different tasks that you will engage in. Okay, now those 3 tasks are built on certain learning outcomes that we as candidates, or our students as candidates, demonstrate. Okay, so if you move to the lower half of the slide, where you start to see some elements in a little more bold but black, all right? And I apologize because this is an image which is tough on the eyes. I agree with that, but it's just that there's no easier way to put this all across in one single go. But what I have done is I've tried to use color to create some sort of distinction. So if, for instance, you look at the difference between a distinction and a merit with regard to one particular skill. So the work is presented, all right, was a synthesis of wide-ranging verbal and non-verbal skills with expressions. Now, which means it had to be a synthesis of wide-ranging skills. Then you will get a distinction. But if you don't do that, and let's say instead you had a wide variety of integrated verbal and non-verbal skills, then that would qualify for a merit. On the other hand, a pass is if you presented a range. Okay, so note the changes in the words. Distinction says it was almost a seamless synthesis of wide-ranging skills. Merit said it was a wide variety of integrated skills. And pass said there was a range. Okay, below pass would go outright and say there were lapses in clarity and fluency and accuracy and so on and so forth. Now, not to test your eyes any further, but to set this as a thought for you, to when you have some time, please go through this in a little more detail. What I have highlighted in a regular gray bold is basically the characteristic that we are looking at, or the outcome that we're looking at. And what is highlighted in color are the varying degrees across each parameter that sets a below pass to a distinction. So therein, I'd say there are 4 shades of color, and the other 50 shades of gray all apply to the actual outcomes. Okay, now, just a little bit about teaching. Okay, the last time I spoke about teaching, because at these levels, I think how we put across what the intended outcome is very, very important. So typically I referred to a teaching plan the last time, which said that a lesson should include the 4 Ps, which was presentation, which is you presenting something to the children; practice, where children get a chance to try it, but with your observation and in a controlled environment, with you hand-holding, guiding, correcting a little bit. Production is wherein they are now fairly comfortable with all the correction that you've offered, that they can do it in a slightly better way. And then, of course, the level of comfort is completely achieved when they can personalize it. Now, the last time I put it as a linear set of arrows, but this time I thought I should put it in concentric circles, because as a teacher, what you choose or the format you choose within your class can vary, so long as a lesson plan has these 4 components included in it. So you might start with asking them to just show you what they can do, which would typically be, in this case, more like a production stage. And thereafter, you might actually get them, you might then go to the presentation stage where you teach them and then ask them to get into the practice stage. So needless to say, personalization is always the culminating stage. And what is the general intent? Now, as far as keeping track of lesson plans, you could list out all your criteria on the left-hand side. And every time you do a lesson plan that covers any of these outcomes or criteria, you can just tick box it to know that you've been spreading an equal amount of time with your students across various criteria. From that, if you want, when you're coming closer towards exams, if you wanted to keep a kind of a helicopter view of what each student is able to do and not, this is kind of an easier way. Again, list down all the outcomes and the criteria and see whether they are checking against which criteria or which attainment descriptor. So this will again help you over there. Which brings us now straight into grade 6 task 1. So if you look very closely over here, it says a candidate will deliver a presentation on an idea for a business enterprise or a social event or a creative endeavor to an imagined, defined audience of at least 20 people. So let's just take this in bits. What would constitute a business enterprise? So as you can see, I've laid out the definitions just to help. And not just the definitions, I've given you a few examples. And against that, I've even given you some talking points to help you develop your presentation material. Of course, please keep in mind, and I want to make this also a disclaimer, to say I'm offering this in the capacity of a teacher. This in no way is a formal way of saying this is the only way to do it. All right. So I'm offering you this kind of guidance based on what I've done in my own classrooms, and that is why I'm sharing that with you. All right. So even a little later, when we actually do some of the tasks, again, it in no way means that if you copy the way I'm doing the task, this is the end result that you will get. I'm doing it again purely as a practitioner of communication skills, which all of us are, just to demonstrate, not to show you a shortcut or a hack towards an exam. I hope that's very clear. So now coming back to, let's see what a business enterprise is. So essentially any enterprise which has a financially rewarding opportunity in lieu of either selling, trading products or services. So for instance, typical examples would be actually every business out there. But if you notice over here, there is a guidance which talks about the fact that the task should be closer in alignment to what a student's interest is. So presumably a child doing grade 6 is somewhere in the vicinity of about 12, 14, 16, 18 years old. Things that would excite them are things like dance and drawing and cafeterias, for obvious reasons, the coffee, the home baking business, tutoring, coaching, things that they can do themselves. And I've also added the talking points. Similarly, in the case of a social event, an event which refers to people forming groups and coming together for an objective would be a social event. So examples would be picnics, seminars, birthday parties, personal milestones or weddings or family reunions or holiday themed parties are all examples of a social event. And again, what could you cover? Those are in the talking points. And similarly, I've done the same with a creative endeavor. Now, the creative endeavor part is a very, very wide definition. Quite frankly, what is creativity? Could be anything. So I've kind of given you a few indicators. It's not an exhaustive list. All right. It's just a few indicators. So what I've tried to do is to explain that a creative endeavor refers to one having the ability or power to create, characterized by originality of thought, showing imagination, and so on. So things that you would see creativity in are things like painting and metalworks or woodwork or making your own jewelry or various do-it-yourself projects, or even music for that matter. So when you are putting that across, then your talking points I've also listed over there for you. Now, I want to get to this part next, which is this whole thing of audience, because grades 6, 7, and 8 at various tasks, all right, have the element of an audience involved. So, to be clear, how does one understand what an audience is, and how does one create a distinction in terms of by profile or by situation or by the way they approach you? So let me just take you through this very quickly. One way of profiling an audience is based purely on demographics, excuse me, which would be things like age, gender, religion, culture, etc., 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 education levels, and whatever. Another way, okay, by which you can profile your audience when you're speaking is the actual situation in which you are. For instance, when you are speaking, is your audience going to be in too cold an environment, or is it too dimly lit? Or am I going to be showing them a slide which is brightly colored and it's in daytime where there's no darkened environment? So these are things that affect the entire audience dynamic. Similarly, in addition to knowing maybe the profile of my audience based on demographics, I must know what does the audience feel towards the topic that I'm going to talk to them about. And finally, what do they feel not just about the topic, but what do they feel towards the speaker? Now, all these four in combination help us wrap our head around the concept of an audience. Okay, and the reason I wanted to spend this little time with you was to explain to you how you could create and craft your intended audiences, as well as also help understand in reverse what kind of an audience would be there. So very quickly, just for some fun and some activity, let's try and do it this way. Okay. So if you see task 1, over here, at a school reunion, can you very quickly type in the chat box, what kind of an audience would it be? Let's say it is your 10th school reunion, the 10th anniversary of your school reunion. What approximate age would your audience be? Very good. So Valerie says 30. Okay. Could be a little younger, maybe between 25, 28, 30. That's right. Nice. So you're getting the hang of it. Now imagine in task 2 that I'm giving you, okay, a grade 6 student persuading fellow students to join a campaign to read to the blind. Tell me a little bit about this audience. How old would they be? Okay, so grade 6 is normally 12, 13 youngsters, someone says, that's right. Okay, now if you are talking to, let's say, all the students in the class, okay, do you think they're very happy with that topic? A simple yes or no. No, exactly. But if you went to members, let's say, of the book club and said, come on, let's go and do this and read for the blind, do you think now they'd be happier? Absolutely, yes, you're good. So you're getting this, all right? Now, most importantly, how they feel towards me. I am the laziest kid in the class, okay? And I am telling them, come on, let's go do it, all right? Given the fact that I have a history of starting something and never finishing it, do you think they're going to listen to me? Absolutely, definitely not. But if I am, let's say, president of the book club, all right, I'm responsible for bringing in new books and talking new ideas, do you think they're going to be receptive to me? Brilliant. Okay, so this is a way in which we craft an audience. So we're going to look at a few more speeches. So I have a couple more examples rather than, you've got the hang of it, so you can just copy these down just for some fun a little later perhaps. If you look at the difference between task 3 and 4, both are doing TV reportages. One is doing it on a breaking news story. which would mean your audience is far more general. And if you're doing it for an extreme adventure trip, then quite possibly you're on a National Geographic or a channel which specializes in that. So this is how we would definitely profile audiences. And we are going to look at this again when we look at things like advertisements and so on and so forth. Now, which brings me to, let's look at what an example task is for a business plan. Now, if you don't mind, I'm going to stop sharing over here because I have to start a new share. Let me see if I can do that. No, I do have to get out of this, so just give me a second. All right. All right. So now I'm actually doing task, which is a grade, the business, presenting a business enterprise. I have got 5 minutes to do this. I am actually going to do it as a task. So if you'd like, you can time me, and here goes. So hi, my name is Olit, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a new venture of mine called Focus Fitness. My audience over here is actually a family gathering. It's my parents' anniversary, and we 3 children make a presentation on their anniversary of where we are before the whole family, so that we celebrate the joy of the family. Being the oldest and 16 years old, I've decided to talk about something that I'm very passionate about. There are about 25 family members over here of all ages, most of them older than me, and certainly many of them with some money who can perhaps help me start my business. On that note, let me tell you a little bit about what I am doing. So currently, as you know, I've just finished school, and I am already working I had a summer intern assignment with Talwalkar's Gymkhana, and now I wish to start my own business, which over the next few moments I will talk about where will it be, what will I do, why is the business so unique, and a little bit about the kind of marketing, operations, and financial projections that I have created around this. So, as you know, currently I'm teaching part-time at Mary Immaculate Girls High School. I teach yoga and I teach fitness training. I just finished my internship with Talwalkar's gym, and I was a hand or a gym hand who was helping and handy around the place. In the bargain, I learned a lot, which kind of got me thinking that already I enjoy dance and I enjoy yoga, and those are areas that I'm good at, that I should now start Focus Fitness. So what will Focus Fitness be? Well, it'll be a location located in IC Colony in Borivali. It's a densely residential area. There are 5 schools within 5 kilometers. The place I imagine it to be is about a 200 square foot facility, which will be children friendly, because I want children to be engaged in fitness. It'll be brightly and painted and lit well. And of course, it'll be motivating. It'll be welcoming every time someone comes to actually work out and would feel like coming back again and again. To help create the mood and ambience, there will be floor-to-ceiling mirrors and, of course, shower facilities for some of the adults who have to rush off to work after a workout. Now, what I want to do in my fitness studio is a combination of yoga, aerobics, and physical training. And the reason why I feel that I would stand out and the business would stand out is because personally, many people know me. And I think that's important because, one, I'm known to be fit. Always did very well in school during sports days. I've trained in yoga, I've trained in dance, and I want to be there hands-on. Now, mom, dad, before you get worried about how much time will I have for studies, I will come to that in a moment. But coming back to the other unique propositions that I will offer is, firstly, the approach would be one of working hard, playing hard. And a lot of the workouts will be developed around personal interests that our users will have. I also want to offer convenient timings and monthly payment options and after school programs, so it's not a burden for any particular parent at one go. In terms of how will I spread the word, so I want to put up posters at my school. I've already spoken to the principal and she's agreed, at the church bulletin board. As you know, there are about 25,000 people who visit church in this area. I also will put flyers in the newspaper, and having a place on the main road means already people will walk in. And of course, gradually over time, I would have word of mouth from satisfied customers. Speaking of which, many of them who've worked with me in the past actually encouraged me to do this. In terms of operations, this will happen on all weekdays. We'll be open 6 days a week. Mom, Dad, I will work only between 4 and 8, so this will not affect my future studies and any other commitments that I have. But I will have 15 students in a batch, and these students will come in twice a week. So in terms of how does this add up financially? Well, to set up this place, I need a lakh as a deposit. To furnish it and equip it, I need another 2 lakhs. And the working capital, don't let that scare you. That's just to help me over the next 6-7 months in case I'm not able to make a go of it. But it will not reach that stage. As far as how much will be my revenue per month, so I've priced this very economically at 1,000 rupees per month. I expect to have 180 children. That's 15 children coming in every hour for 4 hours on 3 days, and then of course repeated. So I expect to earn 1,80,000, and my expenses, as you can see, is about 1 lakh. So I expect to earn about 80,000 a month. So this is a little bit about what I want to do. I do hope all of you, uncles and aunties, will encourage me by putting your hand into your wallet. On that note, thank you very much. So now, as you can see, this is a little bit about a business plan. Do all of you get the idea of what exactly I did? Yes, no? Okay, super, great. So as you can see, time-wise, I took 6 minutes, I believe it was, or 5.5 minutes, thereabouts. So essentially, I presented a business plan for you. I'm not going to go through the other tasks, but this is pretty much the way it'll be. If you look at the talking points and you look at the areas that I've already covered, then you will have a pretty good idea of what I was talking about. Now, coming back to my original presentation, just give me a second. And yep. Okay, so this is where we were. Now let's move on from here. Let's look at grade 6 task 2. So here now you're seeing 2 different versions to the same task. In the in-person exam, the candidate presents a prepared CV, all right, for a job or a training course or an opportunity. Okay, the candidate should then state the title of the job, etc., etc. Now, the examiner asks the interviewee questions based on the role that they choose. Okay, there's a very important part over there that says the role should be relevant to the candidate's own interests, experiences, and aspirations. Okay, now that's in an in-person exam. In an online exam, there is no need for a CV. If you look at the notes in the right-hand corner, I've made that very clear. CV is not required for an online exam. The candidate states the title of the job, okay, or the course or work, whatever they're aspiring for, and the interviewer begins directly from there. Now, in the preparation process as a teacher, you may want to definitely do this, is develop a CV or have the candidate develop this. So just for clarity, a CV is, I've given you the definition of what it is. If you'd like to actually take a snapshot of what all to put into a CV, then this is what I've given you also. All right, so you can break that up into personal details, into educational and professional courses, into various other experiences, and of course into the skills and certificates that you may have achieved along the way. Now, how do you prepare for this task? So, one, when you're preparing for an interview, step one is firstly listen, ask questions, pause, reflect, organize your thoughts, then you give an answer. Okay, and if somewhere down the line you need to adjust your answer, you can pivot and again check in with a change to your answer or an addition or a clarification. All right, and then of course you summarize who you are. Now, typically the stages of an interview would go as follows: introductions, small talk between the examiner and a candidate, the information gathering process, where the examiner will talk to you and ask about, and this is not just true to this interview, it's true to any interview for that matter. So you gather information, it kind of works both ways normally in the professional world. And then, of course, you have a question and answer session where you seek additional details, both sides, a wrap up, and then presumably a next steps if it's a happy ending. Now, as far as working with students in terms of what kind of questions to expect and so on, then this is what you could, I've laid out a few questions just as a guidance. Things like, tell me about yourself or the position, or why do you believe you're suited for this position? Or most importantly, how much would you like to be paid or compensated? Always a very, very tricky question. Okay, so also another kind of tricky question is, why would you consider yourself the better candidate? Let's say there are 10 candidates applying. Why do you consider yourself the better candidate? So obviously over here, modesty beats anything else. So a certain amount of modesty, a certain amount of optimism, a certain amount of personal quality that you bring to the position will stand out. As far as handling tricky questions like, how much would you like to be paid? So again, the best way to perhaps sometimes answer questions like these is by answering it with another question, is to say, how much would you think this is worth? And qualifying it by then saying, I'm quite sure that as the leader in the industry, you've compensated your people very well, which is why you've earned this very envious reputation as an organization. So it kind of builds from there. Now, there are many other ways in which one can actually do this. What I thought I should do is just share with you a very quick CV. So again, just bear with me as I stop sharing and start to share something else. Okay, so I'm going to share with you this time. Okay, so as you can see, this is a PDF document. This is of the young lady who was presenting the business plan. So she's applying, as you can see, she states her objective right at the very beginning. Some basic personal information, and then she says, I'm seeking the position of assistant physical education instructor. She goes out to list her skills, talks about her summer internship, the kind of responsibilities that she undertook, and her learnings, okay, over there, and some of her personal traits and achievements. And then, of course, we always refer to this world of digital literacies, without which many things will come to a standstill. So that's also important, even if you are involved in sport. And then, of course, her educational qualifications, all right, on where she was. Okay, so this is the recommended length of the CV for our particular purposes is 2 pages. Over here, obviously, for obvious reasons, I've not put in a full name and details of a mobile and email account. But this is what you need to complete. Now, the only time you're going to use this is in the case of an in-person exam. In an online exam, you're not going to be using this at all. All right. So coming back again now to my slides. Oh. Okay, so I've just shared with you what typically a CV ought to look like, okay? Which brings us now to grade 6 task 3. Just a quick question. I'm just checking in to see, are you all good? Is everything all right? If you can just type yes. Are you following? Are you with me? Okay, fine. So I know it's 3:41. We still have 2 more grades to do, okay? But I thought it would be best that I do it. Is it all right if I exceed time today to cover grades 7 and 8? Okay, fine. Thank you. All right. So, by the way, just on that note, I must tell you, please, today's feedback form is very, very interesting. It talks very specifically about what I'm doing in these particular webinar and asks you if you want additional sessions, maybe like a once a week or open house where you can come in and ask questions for an hour on any subject and so on. So I see a question, how long, because you have class. So I'm going to try and wrap this up by about 4:15, 4:30 latest, but that's your call. Okay, fine. So I believe every time I ask for a yes, it's quite an outpouring, but thank you. Let's look very quickly now at grade 6 task 3. So over here, what you're really going to be doing is the candidate discusses with the examiner the content and delivery of a text of a speech, okay? And in the online version, all right, the text will be chosen by the examiner from a selection provided in the support guide. Now, obviously in the online version, there are 3 speeches already provided for you or to you. You need to work with all the 3 speeches, and the examiner will choose which one. In an in-person exam, you really have no idea what kind of a piece you're going to get. So like I said, prepare for the worst, okay, and thereafter everything else will be perfectly fine. Now, I just wanted to highlight a little bit of a guidance over here. What are you looking for when you're analyzing a speech? Is purpose, audience, main points, kind of vocal and physical skills? This is the guidance that Trinity has already printed for you. In the case of the online exam, it says over there that the candidate can make notes in the speeches and refer to these notes. So as a general rule, teachers, the ability to use notes, pointers, cue cards exists from grade 2 onwards, all right? So long as that your communication is not being driven by that cue card. It is there to aid you. It is not there to lead the communication. So by all means, you can make visual pointers, and I'll share some of those with you today. But you can also make cue cards or make code words or whatever works for your candidate. All right, please remember, communication is a very, very highly personal development. So let each candidate or let each child develop it the way that they feel most comfortable. So let's move on from there. Let me just show you how do we, and this is again a little bit of teaching guidance, how to analyze a speech. So here you can see, I've taken this and I've put it along 5 parameters. First is the subject. So in the case of the subject, what are we looking for? What is the speech about? What are the main points? Keywords and language, okay, that are relevant to that particular topic. So for instance, if I'm talking about something like rocket science and I'm using words like joules for energy and Newton and stuff like that, it's language which is very specific to what I'm talking about. And it could be the same for any kind of topic that we choose. So long as you're noticing key words that emphasize or help clarify the communicative intent, okay? Similarly, we also then look for the structure and the flow, and finally, we look for transitions. How is it moving between paragraph to paragraph or from flow into the next flow? When you're looking at intent, okay, all communication, be it written, visual, oral, or any form, including multiple media, it serves basically one of 3 purposes. 1, to either inform or to educate you. 2, to entertain or to help you to relate to it. Now, let me explain that. When I say entertain, it's not ha 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 entertain. For instance, reading a a grisly novel of a serial killer, okay, is finally, yes, it's horror, okay, yes, it's thrilling, but it is purely entertainment. All right, unless, of course, it is something that is your life, in which case then it isn't. Okay, so similarly, very often we communicate to relate. All right, so a lot of what we would call the art of small talk is all things to help relate. And finally, of course, whether there is a persuasive call in the intent. So you've got three of these. You need to be able to identify it. Quite possibly, you're normally going to see a combination of all three in sophisticated speech making, but certainly you will have two for sure. Okay, but you can identify the underlying message. Now, in audience, I've already shared this with you. You define them based on the demographics, the analysis of the situation, their disposition towards the topic, and their disposition towards the speaker. When you're looking for vocal skills, where do you think the person ought to have paused? Or how would they have laid more emphasis? Or what kind of pace would have been used? What kind of intonation? Was there too many changes of thought? All right, are they taking you on a seesaw? So will that reflect in your voice? And similarly, what kind of physical gestures would you make, movement, postures? Would there be anything in terms of audiovisual aids? So these are various ways in which you can analyze a speech. Now, when I say analyze a speech, I don't necessarily mean that you're making a speech this way. I'm saying if you are making a speech, then these are things to consider. If you are receiving someone's speech, these are things to also consider whether they're used. All right. Now, let's try this as an example. Okay, so on the left-hand corner, I have kept the parameters over there in terms of the points. And I have shared with you perhaps one of the most famous speeches that is doing the rounds on TED, a speech by Sir Ken Robinson, who talks about whether schools kill creativity. I'm sure all of you have seen this speech. It's quite humorous, apart from being very, very well informed and delivered, and hits home. Has got close to about 70 million views on TED Talks alone. Now, the reason why I'm sharing a speech like this with you is just to give you a flavor and feel, also to help you identify what kind of speeches could work towards helping you. So the easiest thing to do, teachers, is sign up for a TED account. It's free. Look at various speeches, filter them by subject based on the age of your learner, and then look for the transcript. And you can copy off the transcript and actually make working speeches. You also have a chance to help your students learn the art of speech making or speech writing. Okay, so this is just to give you an example. In the interest of time, I won't do this with you as an exercise, but we could, of course, very simply do this as an exercise where you can populate the box. But like I said, we won't. So that's one particular speech. This is another kind of one which talks about the London Tube map system. Again, you could analyze the speech, identify what you think the intent is, what do you think, who is making it, why are they making it, what do you think, who do you think the perceived audience is in a case like this, and so on. Now, that brings me to grade 7, task 1. The candidate gives a presentation on a social issue to an imagined defined audience. So again, social issue, here's the definition. What constitutes social issues? Hundreds of things. I've put a few of them in front of you. All right. Again, please be led by what the learner wants or what they're inclined towards. Over here, they're going to be making a presentation on a social issue. So the definition of issue means either a problem area or an important enough topic to get into the realm of discussion or debate. Okay, so it affects many citizens and it's an area of concern or discussion. Social issues can be distinguished from economic issues, but very often you have some economic issues which become social issues and vice versa. Now, here importantly, you can see that the candidate gets 9 minutes to make this presentation, after which the examiner engages in a discussion, including exploring alternative points of view. So remember, you are making a presentation on a social issue. All right. It's very, very realistic and possible to say that you may not have put in all the thoughts that you had, but did you consider them? Is the big question over here. So I want to share with you something that, in fact, actually, if I'm not mistaken, yes, my daughter did this when she was doing a grade 7 exam. I'm going to share with you a social issue that she chose to speak about. Just give me a second as I load up her presentation. Okay, so here you are. This is, again, you need to define your audience in advance. So over here, she says that her presentation on the social issue involves presenting to a group of fellow students who are between the ages of grades 8 to 12, so typically between 14 to 16, 17, or maybe even 18, and their parents at the monthly parent-teacher meet in school. She is presenting in the capacity of being a student council member, and her topic is, of course, social issue with regards social media. Are we overexposed in the digital world? The setting is the school hall with about 75 attendees. She's using audiovisual aids. Her attire is semi-formal because she is in school, and the time allotted to her is, in this particular case, is 9 minutes. So on that basis, she then starts a presentation. So I am going to kind of do this presentation for you. I'm going to condense it down to 5 minutes. But of course, you can build up from there just to get an idea of what this presentation is. By the way, just a quick question. Would you like me to do this actual task for you? If you can, sorry, I'm going to ask you to type yes. Sorry, Anthony. Would you like me to actually do this task for you, or should I skip? Okay, so it's a yes, fine. All right, thank you. So moving from here, let's start this presentation. Good afternoon, parents, Madam Principal, my friends. Today we gathered once a month, of course, to hear so many things that we wish we never heard, particularly with regards how we can be better as students. But nonetheless, because they're all well-intended, we're here. And today I wanted to bring up an important topic which affects all our lives, which is the digital era and are we overexposed? I'd like you to have a look at this picture. What do you see in it? Yep, brilliant greenery, basketball hoop, swings, even a notice to say, be careful, don't drive rashly, children are playing. But are they? Look at all those children. They've left the ground completely vacant, only to be consumed by their screens. And this leads me to all of us today in this room. Over here, there is a mix of two kinds of people. The baby boomers, that's you, our parents, who definitely have been around before the advent of mobile technology, and my generation, who are the mobile boomers. And somewhere down the line came in the migrants. The migrants are those who've happily traversed the ability to both learn how to adapt with this new technology, despite being rooted in the old ways, and have made a success of it. Now, let's just look at this a little closer. What's the difference? For a lot of the migrants who were born in an era before the invention of a mobile phone and the internet for that matter, a lot of them still do things the way they used to, which means the day started and ended with a prayer. But my generation, we start with checking up what's happening on social media. Now, don't get me wrong, some of our parents are also like us. Okay, in fact, sometimes we learn from them, of course. So the question over here is about measure and knowing how some of the older ways were perhaps better ways. For instance, my parents knew the neighbors and made good friends out of them. We, this generation, have millions of Facebook friends, but sometimes we don't even know, have never even met them once. In the same way, parents earn money the hard way. They prefer to be frugal. For us, it's just the swipe of a card. Don't even know what real cash feels like sometimes. And of course, here comes perhaps one of the largest differences. I still remember my parents playing with me when I was small to amuse me, to engage me. And of course, today, very conveniently, we see the younger parents very happily preferring iPhones and whatever other gadgets to keep their children distracted. Now, this I can go on, and this list will become endless. But question is, are we the culprits? Was this a matter of choice for us, or was it a matter of force? I believe today is a poignant time to think about it, because I think it's a matter of choice. And I say this because one of the people responsible for creating this, while writing a letter to his daughter, says, and this is Mark Zuckerberg no less, spend more time outside than in front of a screen. It's important to go outside and play. You will be busy when you're older, so I hope you make time to smell all the flowers. Now, if he can tell this to his children, then why is he doing, or why are we doing any different with our children? And he's not alone in his thought. The same is true for Bill Gates, who talks about his children feeling awkward about getting a phone at the age of 13 when they thought that they should be getting one much sooner. And again, Bill Gates talks about limits. And keep in mind, this from the man who lives in the smartest home, literally. So it's time now, I think, to act. And when I say that, I mean it's time for moderation. It's time to put the real world first and not the virtual world. Indeed, it should be more about we and less about me or I. And perhaps even consider whether maybe some of us need to go in for de-addiction programs. Speaking of which, some of the large organizations like Apple and Facebook and Google actually have to commit a % of their profits towards de-addiction. Now, shouldn't we be able to do this as a matter of choice? I wish to end over here with those thoughts. It's our choice to say no to abusing social media. All right, so that's the particular task in hand. As you can see, we can do several other tasks, but I think you're getting the general feel over here. Let me just go back to sharing my screen. Yep. Where am I? Which brings us to grade 7, task 2. Now, in this particular case, here you see the candidate discusses with the examiner the content and delivery of an advertisement, the text of which is provided by the examiner 15 minutes before. Now, in the online version to this, the text is chosen by the examiner from the selection that is provided in the support guide. Now, obviously, I do not and will not do anything that is there for the exams, all right? But you have the material already with you in a support guide. Now, I've even shown you what's the difference in the guidances if you're preparing for them. But now let me help you understand what should we be looking at in terms of analyzing an advertisement, all right? Things like the audience, the language that is ideal for the perfect recipient. So for instance, with a lot of advertisements in India, you see a certain amount of Hinglish because that's the way we are, all right? It's cool to do that. So you will find those words being placed into the copy of the ad. Similarly, the way the language and the sentence construct is laid out, the copy, that's the actual wording of the advertisement. Then, of course, what kind of advertisement should it be? With visual or audio or both? What kind of voice would you use? What kind of form would that voice take? Is it going to be a narrative or is it going to be direct speech? Are there going to be any vocal dynamics to that? Okay, or even exaggerated vocal dynamics? Could there be sound effects? Will there be post-production after everything is put together? Will you have here, for instance, the additional crinkle of a wrapper, or the popping of bubbles, or a visual touch-up of, let's say, the bubble gum that is blown out? So these are things that you look at when you're considering an advertisement. Now, just again, for purpose of demonstration, I want to share a sample task with you. And here I'm asking you to please read this short script that I'm sharing with you, okay, and identify the target gender, the recommended length of this ad, the target demographic. My apologies. The kind of voice or the kind of character that would be the main voice in this advertisement. What kind of vocal direction should it take? What kind of music could there be in the background? What kind of sound effects could there be? All right. So this is something that, of course, again, in the interest of time, I'm going to move over this quickly. But this is just a script. This is what the answer to something like this would look like. Okay. So here we're talking about teaching related program, got to do with math, and also reading and writing. So it's basic numeracy and basic foundation skills. So the voice that they believe would be the right advertisement would be a female's voice, a mother's voice, a teacher's voice, quite possibly because you're looking at about an education service, a short crisp ad of about 30 seconds. Who would be the target demographic for something like this? Typically parents with elementary and high school age kids. All right, so you can reverse, work backwards and say, okay, children, parents should be about between the ages of, let's say, 25 to 45. The role that the voice plays could be that of a tutor or a teacher or an educator. What kind of voice or vocal direction would the particular voice use? So one of support, of encouragement, of telling you that they're there to help you, being tactful without saying that you need help. What kind of music? So music that speaks of achievement, that talks about light underlay, something with strings, smooth, and even what kind of sound effects, maybe the sound of children having fun, winning, debating, or visual of them debating, or visual of them winning an academic prize for math, and so on and so forth. So this is how you could work with a lot of candidates. By the way, this is from an actual script that was being used. There are plenty of resources available for these online. So please dig in and you will get a lot. I had another one for you, but I'm going to skip this. This is for a Japanese tea room. Okay. Which brings us now to grade 7, task 3. So here the examiner gives an overview of a social or a political issue, and a discussion ensues where the candidate expresses and explains their views on the situation. So again, I've defined what is a social issue, what is a political issue, given you a couple of examples of political issues because I've already covered that of social issues earlier. But how do you go back and prepare for a task like this? How do you develop teaching around something like this? So this is, of course, the guidance to say what exactly you need to do. All right. But this is where I come back to what I started with a little earlier, about an hour ago, where I spoke to you about the need to develop a strong foundation on the basis of which good communication can be built. So, for instance, a strong foundation in communication starts with what you would very often call a gut feel, all right, which when we put it in the context of developing good intrapersonal communication, it should be step 1. And why should it be step 1? Because this is where we create our very own self-concept of who we are, identities. And we, for instance, start to develop a belief, an orientation to know what is true or false, or what is good or bad. And this is where you as teachers, when you're working with young learners, you could actually do this with them and say, you can do this with children who are maybe 6 and 7 years old. Is being kind a good thing? So they'd say, yes, All right, why? So they start to reason that out. And this is what society does, which is why we always say it takes a village to raise a child. Because this is what not only start off as beliefs, they become values and they become attitudes which become consistent with what society starts to expect out of us. And once we are clear in our heart and our mind that fine, this is what I stand for and this is what is expected of me, that then you start to have the second stage, which is you move from a self-concept to the perception stage, where you start to look outwards and say, if I say this about honesty being a good thing, it will be well received. The perception of it is good. All right. And hence, all these become very closely intertwined with, firstly, is it sitting in my beliefs, values, and attitudes? Does society recognize it? Do they accept it? All right. And based on this relationship that goes back and forth across a variety of issues, you then start to have an expectant form of communication that you know will be accepted. What you learn how to present views, you know how to present dissenting views, because you've done this over a period of time. It's come through not something that you learn by heart. It comes through a period of inflection and reflection on various situations. And finally, our communication is basically just a manifestation of all of these things that is built up. So the reason why I'm stressing this over here is because this can be done from literally a grade initial when you start to work with young learners, as indeed many of you already do. So it's not like I'm telling you something new, but I'm just re-emphasizing what I think is a very, very important aspect of teaching, particularly in the context of communication. Now, moving on from there, if you're going to, again, help sensitize students in this whole process, all right, that is to prepare for this particular task, is to thereafter be able to get them to look at these various topics, all right, which talk about human experience. So from feelings to relationships to social structures, because that is where they get a chance to test it against values, beliefs, attitudes, and so on and so forth. And you can, this is just a sampling of a few. You can do this across a variety of topics. And that's why teaching the subject becomes so much of fun, because a lesson can always be very dynamic based on what the interest is for that day. All right. So in completion, then thereafter, towards this task, what you need to do is, in addition to knowing where you stand on a particular aspect in terms of your belief and your attitude and where does society stand on that, or right, across a variety of issues, you then start to look at how you're going to develop your views, which is normally a combination of 1 plus 2. Steps 1 plus 2 will lead to you being able to express your views. All right. But expressing your views is one element to it. You need to now help finally form it. All right. So when you're forming your views, okay, you will start to look at things like, have I, okay, this is where I know I stand, but what do other people think? And if they're saying something that is not similar to me, I should be willing to listen, and so on and so forth. All right. And then, of course, comes to the last stage where I start to present my views, not in an all-knowing way, but in perhaps a suggestive way, to suggest that this is my perception, this is my view, this is my feeling, this is what I think, this is what I believe. In my opinion, it's this, and this is what comes to mind. So in much the same way, this particular task, okay, is not about trying to have all the answers, but about trying to show perspective to whatever the issue is that the examiner presents you. So take, for instance, this particular sample. All right. Now, I'm just going to read it out for you. In 1956, in the newly independent country of Sri Lanka, Sinhalese replaced English as an official language, while Tamil, the language of 30% of the population, was not recognized at all. In an assertion of nationality, English then stopped being a medium of instruction in schools. But now, Tamil is recognized in certain areas of the country, and English, although no longer an official language, has returned as a medium of instruction and is much valued as a prerequisite for getting a good job and as a linking language for a diverse population. But a generation has missed out on learning English. Should languages be used politically? So this now requires you to then start to do a dissection. Is it right? All right. Is language driven by politics? Should it be driven by culture? And so on and so forth. So this is just a sample to help you with this. By the way, just very quickly, if you can tell me in the chat, I'm sorry, again, I'm going to do this, Anthony. If this is helpful, what I'm doing, is this helpful for you? Okay. All right, thank you. So this is how you then prepare for this task. And I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you a couple of times again and again whether this is helpful. It's just that I know that we've never really, in all these years, spent too much of time at the higher grades of communication skills. And I certainly don't want to lose the opportunity. Of course, I don't also want to kind of cram it all in into one session. And I'm very happy to be able to do further sessions if you think that's I'm very happy to cram it all into additional sessions so that it's easily paced. Okay, I'm laughing, by the way, because every time I ask you for something that says yes and there's a deluge of yes, poor Anthony, who's sitting and monitoring the back end, goes ballistic. So he's written to me to say, could you not reword it and say, is it not helpful? So then, of course, we'll have less answers to filter through. Point taken, Anthony. All right, see, the art of communication. Well, okay, moving on. A couple of other examples. This that talks about, again, different views, all very, very contemporary examples. This is something that deals with Princess Diana, her sons, her death, and how they dealt with it, and so on and so forth. This is another example of something which is very relevant today. Whether you want to tear down someone because of a view that they held in the past, which at that time was perhaps the view of to be held generally. So again, another example. Please click shots of these, so the screenshots of these, so that you can look at it a little later. Let me just go back to the earlier one. You can click this as well, so that you have a better understanding. And of course, this one as well. Okay, which brings us to grade 8, task 1. So this is when it starts to, there's a question with regard to advertising. When we use local music and English, how does the examiner get the nuance? He doesn't need to necessarily get the nuance to understand what the feeling of communication is. All right, so of course, and I'm going to do some of this for you in the context of what are we looking at, because language is one element of the advertisement, but there are other elements to it. So we will, I will do that actually. So here we're looking at an advertisement, or the candidate gives a presentation to an imagined defined audience of at least 20 people on an aspect of the communication process in advertising, politics, or education. So you pick one. Normally, I think everybody lands up picking advertising because it's very, very interesting, fun, very dynamic. And this may include a critical evaluation of the communication tools. So you can look at the tools such as styles of delivery, or the vocabulary, or structure and meaning, or audiovisual imagery sound effects. So even, for instance, if you're using a Hindi advertisement, all right, you could take an element out of it that does not have to do with necessarily the language only. You could look at so many other things. The candidate should state who the intended audience is before they begin. And then, of course, the examiner engages in a discussion about their presentation, including identification of and reflection of the range of communication skills used. All right. Now, again, just to help you over here, I'm actually going to do this as an actual examination task, so that you see what a grade 8 presentation would typically look like at this level. Let me just get up the right presentation. Sorry, you're going to see a slightly larger screen, but just ignore that for now. Here goes. So this is a final year mass media student who's presenting, my apologies for the typo there, to a group of fellow students ages 20 to 22 as part of SEM 1 project. Presenter profile is she herself is a student of mass media. The topic, critical evaluation of the tools of communication in advertising. Setting is the college classroom, about 45 students. She's using audiovisual aids. Her attire is casual and semi-formal. She's got 8 minutes to do this. So let's begin. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the communication in advertising. And of course, I know it's coming closer towards the lunch hour, so I thought I would whet your appetite with an image like this. What do you think of this? Yeah, you're right. Refreshing, cool, chilled, Coke. But hang on for a second. Let me share this with you and then tell me what you think of this.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, por tus olas de grano sambar, yo piscina sakuti, sa ibabaw ng mga prutas. America, America, God shed His grace on thee. Oh, beautiful for oh, beautiful. Que sataj tiracha, de la mer à la mer brillant. Verras tu verrières tirotar, from sea to shining sea.
So, sorry, in between I moused over by mistake while trying to do something else, and which is why the audio got re-clicked. But this is an ad which is, of course, easily available on YouTube. It's the Super Bowl ad and the ad that Coke used for the Rio Olympics. And I think you'd agree with me that the underlying message over here is unity in diversity. And the reason why you feel that is because this was not just a collection of various cultures, it was a sampling of different languages, of different ethnic groups, of different sceneries, all, of course, common in one, which is the beauty of America. Now, over the next few minutes, I'd like to share with you some of the aspects that we can look at and critique. So we're going to actually look at the style of delivery, the vocabulary, the structure, and the syntax, and the semiotics and non-verbal communication that is used. So let's look at the style of delivery. So I think we all know that it's, of course, an exceedingly factual message. We see this everywhere we go. Coke as a brand and as a product is used pretty much everywhere. It's a demonstration, all right, of being in use in life day in and day out in a variety of situations. And of course, there are indirect testimonials over here because you're seeing different people in a variety of situations at different times of the day enjoying a Coke, which is, of course, an endorsement for what it's all about. But at a slightly more recessed and subtle level, you can see that it's inserted as a slice of life in every feeling, in every gathering, in every meaning. And of course, they use various other things like animation and imagery, and most importantly, the choice of one of America's most patriotic songs, America the Beautiful, to which this entire ad is set. So that very choice of a song itself is second literally to the national anthem of America, that with that kind of music, they've set this entire ad in that regard. Now, when we look at the vocabulary and the choice of languages, this one ad stood out because it's got people speaking in English and Spanish and Hindi and Tagalog and Kiris, in Senegalese, and so on. So again, it talks to how different languages can be used in the construct of advertising in the context of cultures. all right, as being a very persuasive end. Now, if you look at the structure of this advertisement, there was a very definite headline, right? There's a sub-headline, there's a body copy, there's a tagline, and then, of course, you see the logo of Coke right at the end, which is kind of pictured almost as larger than life against the backdrop of mountains, all right? So this itself, now when we look at it from an imagery point of view, there's so much more to look at. For instance, semiotics, which deals, or the science that deals with signs and the signifier and what is signified, or the denotative level and the connotative level, picks out these images for us to see at odds. Okay, you see a child's curiosity, and you see, again, a mingling of hands in a spirit of friendship, both as children playing under the water in a swimming pool, as well as youth hanging out, as well as people meeting in a little more formal situation. You see the traditional woman, you see a more contemporary woman, and somewhere in between you see the complete mix of youth and the urban lifestyle. And of course, the images continue to keep coming. You see it in the background of a city. You see it in against the night sky in a desert. You see it on a streetcar. You see it in a restaurant. You see it within, and yet you can see it without. So these different images, again, lend to creating that visual storyboard that helps communicate the effectiveness of what the desired intent is, to create that impression that this particular product is there in every situation, wherever you look, including the past, or including what you're leaving behind, it is there. And this brings us to then again what sells, all right? So all of these different things, does it have an emotional appeal? All right, so for instance, is it personally, does it reflect the personal attributes of love, joy, and family? Absolutely. Did it show social mingling? Absolutely. Did it need to have fear? No, but fear could also be one, because that's a common feeling that everybody has. Maybe the fear of loss of Coca-Cola could be something to fear about. And then, of course, the other things that sell, humor and sex and music, there could be a combination of all of these that actually makes communication in advertising stronger or different or exceeding diverse. Okay. Some other advertisements to look at, and perhaps this is as hard-hitting as they get. This from the maker of perhaps the best German engineering that we've seen till this day. And they talk very simply about this: spare parts for humans are not as original as those for cars, with a very strong message: don't drink and drive. So you see the style of delivery, it's up and in your face. The vocabulary is very clean and clear. The structure and the layout of the sentence and the language is also exceedingly clear. And of course, just look at the image of that visual. I think it speaks 1,000 words. So the sign of that image and what is signified, the semiotic symbol, is also very strong. And it's perhaps just that image is more than enough. All right, which is why that image takes about 60% of the surface area of the entire tile of communication. And it's not just this. You could look at other advertisements. Nike put out this advertisement some time back, which says the shoe works if you do. All right. So again, bold statement to the fact that you need to get up and you do it. Okay. Which plays in, of course, to their other tagline. And of course, I think this one is perhaps the nicest one, considering it's always Christmas in the air. Ingel Els. And this ad, by the way, was displayed in 1990 on a hoarding in Times Square in New York. Won ridiculous number of awards, because they then added this over there to say the holidays wouldn't be the same without J and B, which is Jingle Bells, and of course, in this particular case, something else. So again, another example of what you could look at in the context of when you're looking critically at an advertisement. And I have several more examples that we could sit and do over time, but I think we've kind of come almost to the end over here. Let me just see if I can go back and get this out of the way. I have a thought. Okay, so there's just 2 tasks left. It's 4:26. Okay, so I'm going to continue. I just have 2 more tasks. I'm sorry for being a little over the mark on time today, but as you can see that these are deeper grades, and I wouldn't be right in doing justice to it if I didn't spend this kind of time. So this is where we were at, is grade 8, task 1. And that's what I just showed you, the advertisement. Let's look at task 2. In this particular task, the candidate provides a public address in response to one of 3 scenarios. This is in the case of the in-person exam. Excuse me. And the reason this is that way is because the examiner will give you the various tasks and the options, and you prepare for 15 minutes, and then you go in and you tell him which one of the 3 that you've chosen from what he's already shortlisted. In the case of the online assessment, this takes on a slightly different format. So firstly, on page, there is a guidance page in the support guide that actually gives you the various options. And in fact, you have a large preset list of tasks which are already being laid out for you. It's on page 11 of the support guide. And I'll share that with you in a second. But the essential difference is that over there you have 11 different topics that you can prepare on. You can choose your own speech in advance. But in the case of the online exam, instead of making a 4-minute speech, you only make a 90-second to 2-minute speech, and the examiner thereafter offers you an intervention or makes a change to something in your speech, which kind of gets you thereafter to be responsive to that. Just give me a second while I share this screen with you, please. There you go. All right, so this is where we are. This is the guidance that is there for this particular task. Okay, so these guidances, by the way, are from the syllabus. Okay, and please, teachers, particularly for the higher grades, it's very important to not just look at the grade page, but to look at actually the guidance that is behind or referred to online or in any other external document. Now, in the case of the online exams, and that should concern you immediately, these are the options that you have, and this is on page 11. I know this might be a little small for your eyes. There are 6 different options over here, but you are required to choose one of them. You are given the scenario. Okay, so scenario 1, you're given where the venue is, who's the audience, and what is the scenario, and then you come up with a speech. Okay. Now, I'm not so concerned about this. I'd much rather spend a little time telling you how to go about preparing for this task. So this is if you pay attention to the left-hand side of this particular image, speech making all starts with, of course, what are you talking about? What's your subject or your topic? And of course, it's much the same way of how we analyze a speech, but now we look at it from a different way of performing it. So the most important thing that I need to understand is, what am I going to be talking about? Okay, so if I'm introducing a chief guest, okay, then I know what I need to be doing. All right, so words then that I'm going to use in the context of introducing the chief guest is, firstly, is it a male? Is it a female? Do they have any salutations? Are there any obligatory titles that need to go with that? What am I going to say about them? Am I going to talk about their achievements? Am I going to talk about their charitable work? Again, I must know who's my audience. All right. So I've created this as a circle so that you understand how does the process of speech making work. So you have your topic or you have your subject. You then consider your audience. And while considering your audience, you literally get down to those details that we referred to earlier, the demographics. Where's this audience sitting or standing? What do they feel towards this occasion? What do they feel towards the speaker who's coming up. Again, what is the intent? Am I there literally as to introduce someone? Am I there to facilitate something that is happening, an inauguration? Am I there to hold fort as the MC or the host or the anchor? Then on the basis of these three things, I then brainstorm and put together my additional thoughts. And then, of course, when it comes to me finally delivering or me engaging with the audience, I now need to see what my role is. And thereafter decide whether I'm going to put in a couple of stories, if I am going to speak that long, or a couple of examples. And of course, this now varies based on what is my intent and what is my role in this entire thing. Okay, so this is by and large the bare bone format or structure of how we put together a speech. Now, and this is the interesting part, because 2 minutes into the speech, the examiner is going to throw something your way which requires you to make an alteration into your speech. So it's important to look at what are the possible areas that someone can perhaps make a change. Okay, so again, they may make a change in the case of the topic or the subject, which in this case is maybe there's a change in the agenda items. All right, maybe from, let's say, 11 people of the Indian cricket team showing up, the captain isn't showing up. Okay, so if you're going to introduce the captain first, then don't. Maybe start with someone else. Okay, or is there a change in the flow? Are we moving something around, and hence does the speech now have to be redone or reworked? Or again, the audience, okay, has the venue changed? Has something new happened with the audience? In the case of the intent, has there been an addition or a deletion or an alteration of one of the reasons why we were giving the speech in the first place? Okay, so you will get an idea of the possible changing dynamics. Okay, there is one illustrative example over there, but I'm happy if you want that we can do this another time, and I can do this just threadbare with you, maybe live, where you can get to ask me questions as we go along. So this is how you would prepare for this task, okay, and look at the possible intervention areas that can be changed so that this is how you prepare for your task, okay? Which brings us now to the last task with grade 8, which is task 3. The candidate presents an overview of a contentious issue of their own choice, okay? So now this is a very interesting task, because here the aim of this task is to assess the candidate's ability to understand and convey arguments related to an issue in a balanced, concise, and perceptive manner. So you do not have to stake a claim and say, I agree with this or I disagree with this. All right. It's about the ability to reflect, which is why, again, I go back to, it starts with what do I feel within on any topic? And thereafter, how does society respond to that? Is it in a code of acceptable or not acceptable? And if it's not, then why? Who is affected by it? How are they affected by it? And so on. So again, to help you kind of prepare for this task, of course, I've defined for you how to source your issue while you're working towards this task, is have a clear understanding of what a social issue is, have a clear understanding of what a political issue is. Of course, you can also choose from a current news item. And you even have a few examples that I've given you. By no means exhaustive, just purely a few that are suggestive. Okay. Now, how would you go about preparing for that? So one is to source your issue. The two is pretty much like we do in the case of a reportage, all right, is take your story, consider all the angles to it. Thereafter, figure out where are you getting your information from, all right, and what are the additional perspectives. Okay, so any topic, which is particularly the ones which are contentious, have different angles and have different perspectives. And that's the part that you need to be exceedingly familiar with. All right. Thereafter, you then put it down in the case of various talking points. So to give you an example, a couple of years ago, my daughter did this for a task where she chose to talk about STEM versus STEAM in the context of education. Is there too much of a focus being given on the science, technology, engineering, and math, and actually none paid to the arts and the humanities? So she spoke about this because this was happening at about the time when college admissions were on, and the percentage system seemed to reflect a higher percentage only in favor of STEM. And that creates an unbiased effect where, or rather biased effect where only if you're a science student will you score those marks to get into a college, even if you weren't choosing science for higher studies. All right. So as a result of which, she decided to present on this social issue, which was at that point in time also a current news item. So this is just the starting blocks of what are the kind of questions you can look at. But if you wanted to probe this further, please take a screenshot of this. You should typically do this next. Explore the issue. Okay. And again, I've given you a series of points over there that you can actually follow to explore issues a little more threadbare. Thereafter, understand the interests. What's at stake? Who has what at stake? All right. Why does it matter? And then, of course, from your perspective, how would you develop options? Okay. Had you been able to solve this particular issue? This last part is going to help you in being able to discuss with the examiner any possible discussion point that comes out from the earlier parts. All right, when the examiner is trying to explore the issue more, or the examiner is trying to understand the interest, your ability to have already thought through what are the possible options is going to preempt any question. Okay, and this is pretty much the way you would plan for a discussion on any topic. Is you would read up, is you would size it up from different perspectives. All right, reason, test the reason. Okay, see if it will be validated and accepted by everybody else. And over here, by everybody else, I mean in your mind's eye of who the everybody else is. Okay,